Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Punaktu Sahaviryam Kahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end.
So Dan Wilson from Semisonic wrote these words not just about, but to his son in the days before his birth, before his son was born. And it's all the more fitting for us this evening since it's closing time for this course. And also my nephew, Mayfield, celebrated the birth of his daughter a few days ago on Monday evening. And the philosopher who must not be named once said, the beginning must be begun again, with all of the strangeness, with all of the darkness, and with all of the uncertainty that attend any true beginning. So we come full circle now as we draw to a close. This religious quest, for most of you, began 7 weeks ago, but for me began at least 6 months ago. But for me, and hopefully some of you, this closing time marks the end of one beginning and the beginning of another. Through much of the previous weeks, I've been wondering what should come next. And for a while, I was convinced that it was going to be the Gospel of Luke. I really had it all planned out. 6 weeks on the Gospel of Luke, 4 chapters a week, ending just after Easter. But as I've been listening to student podcasts and other things, I'm reminded that how we engage, how and why we engage, what our motivations are for learning, have a big effect on how we conduct ourselves ethically. I kind of screwed that up. That's all right. I don't want to say that motivations are everything, but motivations are profoundly important. And I'm not sure that we're ready for a text as provocative as Luke's gospel. Second, anyone who knows me knows that I care very deeply about about all of my students, but in this course I particularly care especially about 2 students that mean the world to me. So thinking about them, the next chapter in this religious quest, for those who want to continue with it, we're going to spend 6 weeks on the Phaedrus dialogue, Plato's Phaedrus dialogue, culminating in the allegory of the chariot. So some of you are taking this course for credit and may be really glad to put me and this course behind you, but anybody who wants to continue, you're welcome, and I encourage you to do that, and I value your unique perspective. So my plan is to start next week with spending 6 weeks on Plato's Phaedrus dialogue, which is mostly about teaching, how to learn, and the relationship between desire, wisdom, and ethics. Some of you have studied the text with me before. And after that, we're going to start over and spend 6 more weeks on the Katha Upanishad. The Katha Upanishad is about ethics, purpose, and finding a person's unique purpose in life, or swadharma. So my tech team, my very competent tech team, and I are going to continue live streaming this religious quest every Thursday at 6 p.m. And I welcome any of my former students or friends of former students to join us in the Google Meet. There's no commitment necessary. There's no homework. There's no grades. Not that people do homework anyway. And no credit. But all that's required is just a genuine motivation to learn from the ancient wisdom of these sacred scriptures and to do so together. Sahana vavatu, sahano bunaktu, or as Jesus said, where 2 or 3 or more are gathered, there also I will be. So let's start over. So this week I've been reading this text by Radhakrishnan. Radhakrishnan's translation of the Bhagavad-Gita. So Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan was an outstanding scholar and a professor in the first half of the 20th century. He died in 1975, just a couple weeks before I was born. He was a professor and chair at the University of Oxford, might have heard of it, and also at the University of Chicago, might have heard of that. And he not only was professor at numerous universities in India, but he actually founded numerous universities in India. And in India today, his birthday is actually celebrated as Teachers' Day, because he was convinced, as I am, that the success or failure of a democracy depends on its teachers.
Yes.
So I should mention that Radhakrishnan was also the first vice president of India. There's a picture there, and he was also the second president of India. There's a picture there of him with, what's his name? JFK. So Radhakrishnan was an outstanding scholar, brilliant philosopher, excellent theologian, gifted writer, all of which makes his translation and commentary on the Gita a treasure, but that's not why I picked it for this week. I picked it because, I mean, I literally have dozens of translations and commentaries on the Gita, and each is excellent, but I picked it for the same reason that I chose to focus on Aurobindo a couple of weeks ago, and that's because in 1940s India, when this was written, India was in a period of creation and recreation, which is, of course, part of the title of this course. It was a period when India was liberated itself from the British Empire, and also a time of deep political, religious, and social division. India became partitioned into India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Both Radhakrishnan and Gandhi recognized the need to heal their society of the deep political, ideological, and religious divisions that were literally tearing their nation apart, which is why I chose this, because I fear that our own society is threatened by similar ideological, political, and religious divisions today. Moreover, I agree with both Gandhi and Radhakrishnan, who both believed that the Gita is a very special text. Part of what makes it special is that both of them believed that this was a text with an ability to unite people who believe very different things without asking them to change their deeply held beliefs. So I want to read a few sentences from his preface, and that will probably go away before I finish reading all of it, because I'm a little behind. So all great doctrine, as it is repeated in the course of centuries, is colored by the reflections of the age in which it appears and bears the imprint of the individual who restates it. Our times are different. Our habits of thought, the mental background to which we relate our experiences, are not quite the same as those of the classical commentators. The chief problem facing us today is the reconciliation of humankind. The Gita is specially suited for the purpose, as it attempts to reconcile varied and apparently antithetical forms of religious consciousness, and emphasizes the root conceptions of religion, which are neither ancient nor modern, but eternal, and belong to the very flesh of humanity, past, present, and future. History poses our problems, and if we restate old principles in new ways, it is not because we will to do so, we must. Such a restatement of the truths of eternity and the accents of our time is the only way in which a great scripture can be of living value to mankind. How about that? I finished before it went out. Okay, so I hear something. Hey, man. Kid said you want to see me. Yeah, like 4 hours. Well, I'm here now. What you want? Well, I wanted you to do a promo spot. Yeah, I can do that. When you want me to do it? Right now. Like right now? Yeah, right now. Oh, howdy, y'all. So Shady Buffett here. I'm the brewmaster and visionary for Abby's Blue Hole Brewing, and I'm here to tell you about our newest brew. It's called Not a Seltzer, and we here at Abby's Blue Hole Brewing, we're given to the apophatic. Sure, he taught y'all what that. I thought this was the last class. You didn't teach them apophatic?
I can't teach everything, man.
All right. Well, anyway, it's called not a seltzer, and it's 3 words. Not a seltzer, and as the name implies, it's a seltzer. But as the name implies, it's also not a seltzer. So what I mean by that is basically I was making a seltzer, and it was sitting there, and during quarantine and all this stuff, everything just takes longer. You want to go to the grocery store, it takes like a week and a half, and so it was sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, and the longer it sits there, and more alcohol it gets. ABV keeps going up. And so, it's a seltzer, but it's also, it's kind of like a, sparkling moonshine, if you get my drift. It's like, you can't have just one, if you know what I mean. Anyway,
Right,
cheers. Uh-oh, we lost the end. That's okay. Abby's blue hole ruin, deeper and wetter. Okay. Plans for this day. It won't seem like that for much longer. All right, forgive that very rude interruption. Let's start over. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samavita yuyutsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kimakurvata sanjaya. It's the first verse of the Bhagavad-Gita. It begins with the word dharma. So on the field of righteousness, on the field of the Kurus, when my people and the sons of Pandu had gathered together, eager for battle, what did they do, O Sanjaya? So I had lots more visuals planned, but I spent a really long time on the first 12 minutes of the course, 12 minutes of this class. So we're kind of out of visuals now. But the Bhagavad Gita is 18 chapters long, 700 verses, written in metered verse, like a song. In fact, the name Bhagavad Gita means the song of the Lord. But these 18 chapters are part of a much, much longer epic poem called the Mahabharata. To understand the Gita, we need to know a little bit about how it fits into the rest of the story. So the Mahabharata tells the story of 5 good brothers, the Pandavas, and the sons of Pandu, and also their selfish cousins, the Kauravas. Basically, to oversimplify the story, you have the good guys and you have the bad guys. The bad guys are bad. They're very selfish. They're wealthy and they're powerful, and they abuse both. They abuse women and children. They steal from the elderly. They commit all manner of injustices. And by this point in the story, which is, the Mahabharata is like crazy, crazy long. It's 4 times the length of Homer's Odyssey and Iliad combined. So it's really, really long. And these 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are quite short, but they come, much later in the text. So it's lots happened. We're beginning in media res for sure. By this point, the good guys have literally tried everything they can think of. They've made compromises and deals and negotiations with the Kauravas, but the bad guys do what bad guys do. They cheat, they steal, they lie, they break their word. And having exhausted every other possibility, the Pandavas realize that they must go to war, cannot allow these injustices and victimizations of innocent people to continue. So, the Bhagavad Gita, as I have not drawn on the board, armies from both sides they're entering the battlefield. They're armed, they're ready. I did bring my bow. They're armed and they're ready, they're willing. Turn to Arjuna. Arjuna is the general of the army, and when he gives the signal, the war will begin. Now, Arjuna has earned his place as a general. He didn't get it any other way by earning it. He's an outstanding leader. He's no stranger to battle and the ugliness of violence and war. He wants to give the other side one more chance to back down, right? He also wants to see the faces of the people that he's about to fight. So he asks his charioteer to drive their chariot to the center of the field. All right, so let's visualize the scene. All sorts of visuals I had planned to put right here, but Shady Buffett instead. When he gets there, he looks at the army of the wicked men that he's about to fight, men who do all those bad things and commit lots of injustice using their wealth and power, and he's ready to fight. But then, as he sees the faces of all these bad guys, he then catches the glimpse of some other faces. He sees some very good people on the other side. He sees some family members, he sees his uncles, he sees his philosophy teacher, he sees literally sees his philosophy teacher, he sees his archery teacher, he sees his gurus and his professors, his mentors, people that he loves and respects. What are they doing on the other side? They're not selfish, they're not bad people, they're not evil, so why are they standing ready to fight for these unethical tyrants? Seems like a good question, I think. So he grows despondent. He's confused. He's distressed. He's sad. He doesn't know what to do. He's surrounded by armies on both sides, and they're waiting for his signal. And instead of giving the signal, he drops his bow to the ground, and he slumps into his chariot. Now, 7 weeks ago, on the first of these lectures, we saw Siddhartha Gautama, before he became the Buddha, experienced very similar kind of depression. He was depressed and upset, not so much at all of the injustice in the world, but at the fact that nobody seemed to give a shit about it, that nobody was doing anything about it, that he was surrounded by people who were just complacent when all of this was happening all around them. So, both of them ask the same thing. What's the point? What does all of it mean? Like Nietzsche's madman, he asks, is there still any up or down? How can good people who have faith in the scriptures which teach love and justice, how can they stand up with those who practice hate and injustice? With just a glance upon the faces of his neighbors, Arjuna became depressed, lost, and confused. That's chapter 1 of the Gita. Now, before we go any further, I want to draw attention to the chariot. Several times in this course, we've talked about chariots, and in the next course, if anybody continue, well, hopefully somebody will continue, but I'll be here nonetheless. But in the next segment, we'll talk about the Phaedrus dialogue, which culminates in this allegory of the chariot, which I've just mentioned before. And after that, after these 6 weeks on the Phaedrus dialogue, then we'll talk about the Katha Upanishad, which also, surprise, surprise, has a passage about a chariot. So before we go any further, I want to draw attention to this chariot. Now, the Gita was composed, much debate among scholars, but somewhere around the first century AD, roughly the same time as the Christian New Testament. But 500 years before that, we find the Katha Upanishad, which we'll study in April. And in that text, we find another allegory of the chariot. I want to just read a few verses from that, and some of you have studied that with me in the past as well. So that passage goes as follows. Know the self, the Atman, know the self as a rider in a chariot, and the body simply as the chariot. Know the intellect as the charioteer, and the reins as the mind as the reins of the chariot. The senses, they say, are the horses, the 5 horses, and the sense objects are the paths in front of those horses. He who is linked to the body, senses, and mind, the one who enjoys. When a man lacks understanding and his mind is never controlled, his senses don't obey him, or he obeys his senses. as bad horses, a bad charioteer. But when a man has understanding, when his mind is ever controlled, his senses do obey him as good horses, good charioteer. So, just in case there are any doubts, I should mention that the Gita directly quotes from the Katha Upanishad, including chapter 15, the upside down tree that I mentioned in the first lecture. So I hope that you can see that the Gita is not telling us a history of events. It's a profound philosophical myth, which you know about already, what a myth is, and ethics. That much should be clear. On that, none of us should disagree. As to what does it mean? How do we interpret it? These religious questions find innumerable answers. And I want to give you just a few perspectives on it, and then I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to the folks in the Google Meet. By the way, speaking of the Google Meet, smiling up there, I see, which makes me so happy, the face of Nick. And I am very happy that Nick is here. Don't look shocked. Very happy that Nick was here, especially to come and join us today for a number of reasons, but first and foremost is because Nick is a military veteran, and not a veterinarian, but a veteran in the military. Although they must have military veterinarians, right? Yeah, for the dolphins and things. But anyway, so he's a military vet. He's fought for our country in, give me a thumbs up, was it both Iraq and Afghanistan, or just Afghanistan?
Iraq, Afghanistan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just Air Force.
Just Air Force. Okay, yeah. Were you a Ranger in the Air or something like that? Yeah, you were.
No.
Okay, all right. Some sort of, all right, we'll just BSD, right? That was your BSD. Anyway, so he fought for our country, and I feel like we cannot possibly do justice to the Bhagavad-Gita, which is a text about a battle and whose central character is a general in the army. They talk about military leadership. It's a text for leaders. It's not really a text for everybody. It's a text intended for people who are interested in being leaders, or people who are leaders. There's a lot of leadership aspects to the text. So second, though, I don't want to tell too much. I don't want to tell any of Nick's stories, but he's had experiences with death and has experiences with the relationship between the mind and body that many of us can only imagine. And the stories he has shared with me and others are just captivating, to say the least. And also, just Eric and Nick and I are the only male voices in this little group, so I just kind of need another man here. I don't know, but just have a role to play here. All right, before we get to Nick, I have to teach a little bit more. So on page 1 of the syllabus for this course, for the students that are taking it for credit, I state they've got their oral exams this week, and then they've got the final podcast due on Monday. I'm just giving a couple little housekeeping things for the credit students. So on page 1 of the syllabus, I state that the primary learning objective for this course is that each student should be able to demonstrate a working knowledge of the phenomenological method. It's not enough to be able to write an essay about it. You need to actually be able to put it into practice, right? Demonstrate it. Show me that you can do it. That's what I expect from you in the final discussion assignment, which is due Monday. So let me do what I do, which is to model it one more time. So step 0, let me model, step 0, draw a circle. Step 1, let us know where you are coming from. You already know more than you want to know about me, and I already know you pretty well. Step 2, vaguely identify this thing that you put in the circle. That's what phenomenology is, right? You've got to have some phenomena in the center of the circle. And if I could draw anything, which I cannot, then I would draw something, some kind of a chariot, right? Stick figures is literally the best I can do. And then I know from experience that I should not even try to draw a horse. I'll just say horses. Right? 5 of them. So we've got this chariot at the center, and 2 riders. We have 2 riders in the chariot in the Kata, which I just read, and we have 2 riders in the chariot here in the Bhagavad-Gita. Now in the Kata, the rider is identified as the Atman, which we've studied the past few weeks, the self of all beings, which we discussed. In the Gita, though, the charioteer is identified as this kid named Krishna. Krishna is the supreme god of the universe who has taken on human form. He's not got some kids upset out there, but he's taken on human form. He doesn't become human. He's fully God, but just appearing. He's an avatara. Avatar means descent. He's descended into this world and taken on human form. As I mentioned last week when I was setting up this lecture, he's taken on human form in order to guide Arjuna as teacher. So he's not taken he's not here to do battle, but he's here to be Arjuna's teacher and to be Arjuna's charioteer. So the Gita, this is the Bhagavad-Gita, the song of the Lord. So this is the teaching that he gives to Arjuna here on the battlefield. So we've got the Pandavas on one side, we've got the Kauravas on the other, and then on the Kaurava side we've also got his teacher, etc. Step 3A, listen to the experts, and step 3B, listen to your neighbors, right? Listen to one another. So all right, let's start step 3 now, step 3A. According to Madhusudana Saraswati, don't expect anybody to know that name, but according to Madhusudana Saraswati and many other experts, the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita can be divided more or less into 3 sections, which teach karma, jnana, and bhakti. So karma, as you know from your the last assignment I gave, which was a podcast recording of Eric and Rachel and my karma samskara. As I said, this is where our religious quest has been leading toward. So let's talk about karma. So I'm gonna quickly explain what these do, and as I do, I'm gonna mention a few scholars, leaders, thinkers who these differing views or represent different ways of interpreting them. One of them is a man named B.G. Tillich. He died, I think, in 1920. So 1850s to like 1920. And for Jnana, we can talk about Aurobindo. And for Bhakti, Mahatma Gandhi. And I'll toss in one extra one for free, Shankaracharya. So first, karma. So for those of you who are enrolled in the course, I assign this podcast discussion of the words karma and samskara that we recorded last April. Just interesting listening back to that. That's where I threw in Shady threw in the grocery store reference. And for anybody else, I can toss a link into the YouTube description. So that's one interpretation from one expert. I count as an expert. Right now, I want to give you some other ones. So for Shankara, the 8th century theologian that I talked about last week, the word karma in the Gita always refers to exactly one thing. Karma means the performance of Vedic ritual sacrifices called the yajnas. And shoot, I had another visual. I had a little video queued up, but I didn't queue it up. So anyway, what I mean by these yajnas, these performances, these Vedic rituals, which involve fires, usually 3 fires, and then thrown into the fire. There's ritual sacrifices that are expounded in the Vedas, and particularly the Aranyakas, the Brahmanas, and reflected on in the Aranya. But anyway, karma for Shankara, karma always means the Vedic sacrifices. So up karma there, he always refers to the Vedic sacrifices, the rituals, which are called karmas. In fact, the entire texts which describe these rituals are called the karma kanda, the section of the Vedas that tell us how to do karmas, which is usually understood as rituals. Now, so this, from Shankara's expert perspective, is what the Gita teaches, and he was not wrong. Now, during the Indian fight for liberation from the empire, this leader named B.G. Tilak argued that the word karma should be taken literally, or that the Gita should be read and understood literally, and in fact that the Gita should be taken literally. In his context, we were talking about the Indians didn't really want to be ruled by white people who lived halfway around the world. They wanted freedom, they wanted liberation, not unlike Americans in the 18th century. They wanted liberation, and so Tilak looked to the Bhagavad-Gita and drew attention to the Bhagavad-Gita and said, look, this is a text about overthrowing tyrants and, assuming what's called swaraj, self-rule. So sometimes, as Tilak argued, sometimes option, part of why I wanted Nick here, sometimes there is no other option but to literally take up arms and fight the bad guys in the name of justice and freedom. Tilak wasn't wrong. Second, jnana. So jnana means wisdom, knowledge, wisdom. Turn to Aurobindo. Now Aurobindo gives a very different interpretation of the Gita. For Aurobindo, says the Gita teaches that if one truly understands the nature of reality and the sacrality of life, we had two classes on Aurobindo's understanding of non-dual self, then such a person will see, quote, I'm quoting from the Gita, the self in all being, and all being the self. In other words, I and you, subject and object, are mutually constitutive correlates. In other words, so subject and object, I and you, are not two different things, right? I and you are mutually constitutive correlates. Or in other words, I am a different person now than I was before I met Aaron and Michelle and Irene and Cheyenne and Lindsay and Lorelei and Sophie and Nick and Eric and Michael and Rachel and Josh and Genevieve and so many others in this course, and Akuya. For Aurobindo, when we begin to see each other and we begin to see every neighbor in that way, every neighbor that we meet as a unique manifestation of the self of all beings, then we will love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And when love acts, it looks like justice. When love acts, it looks like justice. So this, from Aurobindo's expert perspective, is what the Gita teaches. He was not wrong. Third, Bhakti. So Bhakti means devotion, particularly devotion to God. Here we can turn to many scholars, but I want to turn to Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi believed that God is the creator of all beings. He also believed that the Creator loves each and every one of the Creator's creations, all of God's creatures. If a person truly loves God, then they will love God's creatures. For Gandhi, each and every person in the world is what he calls a Harijan. Harijan simply means a child of God. In the same way that a person cannot claim to love me and at the same time cause harm to my children, likewise, a person cannot claim to love God and at the same time cause harm or injustice to God's children. Every creature is a child of the Creator. So in other words, when love acts, it looks like justice. This, from Gandhi's expert perspective, is what the Gita teaches. He wasn't wrong. Okay, so tossing in one more perspective. It's a fourth perspective, but it's you might call it a non-religious perspective. It also comes from Gandhi. So human thought, as we've talked about before, as I talked about past couple of weeks, human thought, right? Consciousness is dialectical. Consciousness occurs as this discourse, this internal dialogue. When we think, it's as if there are, I'm always doing this, when we think, it's as if there are two different voices in our heads, right? One asks, should I do my homework? And the other one says, nah, let's play Fortnite. The one voice says, should I eat cake? And the other voice says, is it made of broccoli? The other one says, you get the idea. So philosophers and psychologists often refer to one of these voices in our head as the voice of, I guess the dog is now chasing the cats. Yeah, that happens. So philosophers and psychologists often refer to one of these voices in our head as the voice of moral conscience. Like me, Gandhi gives us more than one interpretation of the Gita. And in strong, by the way, Gandhi didn't write a commentary on the Gita, not because he was a gifted writer. He was a gifted orator and teacher, and so you can find, I can copy, you can find easily Gandhi's Discourses on the Gita, which are actually just transcriptions of his speeches. He gave a series of lectures on the Gita, going through the entire Gita. But it's really neat because these were recorded. So there's people in the room, and he's talking about kids playing and noises and things that are going on, distractions that are going on in the room, which is, I don't know, it's a very portrayal and understanding of Gandhi studying the text with others, right? Not just studying it in a room. By the way, I should also mention that the first time Gandhi ever read the Gita, first time he was an adult. He went to London, became a lawyer, barrister, and all these kind of things. But the first time he ever read the Gita at all was when he was in jail. First time Aurobindo ever read the Gita was when he was in jail. It's something that people do when they're fiercely committed to standing up for others in the face of injustice. So for Gandhi, in strong opposition to Tilak, by the way, Gandhi called Tilak the maker of modern India. Not clear that that's a compliment, but nevertheless, for Gandhi argues that the Gita is not at all intended to be taken literally as this literal battle between bad guys and good guys, but instead took it into this deeply psychological, gave it a deeply psychological, allegorical interpretation. Gita represents this internal struggle, right? Like the Pandavas and the Kauravas aren't people that, um, but instead the Pandavas and the Kauravas are like those two voices in our head, right? The voice of moral conscience saying, do this, and then the other voice, the voice of selfishness that longs for satisfaction of, yeah, selfish means and selfish ends. So he argued that the Gita represents this internal structure. And for Gandhi, the bad guys, the Kauravas, do not represent these other people, but instead represent the selfish that each and every one of us experiences on the daily. Should I eat the last cookie? Or should I give it to my kids? Should I drink the last beer? Or should I share it with my neighbor? I'm not giving it to my neighbor. Should I buy a vacation home? Or should I, help those who are homeless or in a time of need? If my neighbor is being beaten or beaten by a bully, do I selfishly turn a blind eye and say it's not my problem? Or do I stand in front of their blows? Gandhi, of course, did the latter. From Gandhi's expert perspective, the Gita is not about a decision to go to war with our neighbors. It's about an ethical, psychological battle between complacency with injustice or the nonviolent struggle for justice. When love acts, it looks like justice. He wasn't wrong. That's all I got. That's literally where it ends. Uh, so so I will stop there, but I want to give you one more data point before we shift the discussion. And as part of the discussion, I want to actually turn to some of the texts and look at a couple passages if we have time. But we have half an hour, so I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion. But this is this is something I'm bringing in, but really it was brought up by Michelle last week, so it was a contribution from her. And she's like, what? But CJ, will you mind playing that other clip?
Did you ever hear the story of the Fisher King? He turned to the fool and said with amazement, "How could you find that which my brightest and bravest could not?" The fool replied, "I don't know. I only knew that you were thirsty."
Some professor, I don't know. So yeah, I did at Michelle's suggestion watched The Fisher King a couple nights ago, and that it is just a beautiful movie. It is and as I was watching it, it really is sorry it's so course. I've taught this course so many times, and every single time it is different. And this time is considerably more different because of the whole YouTube thing and everything. But every time it's different. And why is it different? It's different because the people are different. It's different because the conversations are different. It's different because I'm always just kind of revising as we go based on the conversations that are coming out of the podcast and how things are. Every class is different. But this one, I don't know that I would have thought The Fisher King was such a perfect movie for other versions of this course, but it just really seems perfect for this one. So thank you for bringing that up, and I'm so glad that I watched it the other night. As far as the kid question, I still don't know the answer to it. I was watching it on my own to think about whether to watch it with the kids. It's crazy heavy. It's a heavy movie. I think it was heavy before. Yeah, it's heavy. It's about PTSD. So there's trauma that's can't have PTSD without trauma, right? So it begins with trauma, and the trauma is traumatic. And so here you have these two people who are naked in Central Park, madmen in their own way. And anyway, thank you. I thought it was beautiful. And in that story, the Fisher King story, which of course comes from, it's also in Merlin, by the way, Irene. But yeah, that it's the little bit different version in Merlin. But yeah, it's a story about motivation, right? Your motivations matter. Your motivations, how you learn, why you're learning, why you're doing what you're doing, just has a profound impact on what you learn. And I think I'm finding, I've known this for a long time, but every semester, especially as I do oral exams and that kind of stuff, you see how people go through the same course and take such wildly different things out of it, and the experiences are different. And I think motivations just play such a significant role, and in part, I've been bothered because this course, just to let you know, I mean, in a typical college course, you're expected to spend 115 hours. It takes 115 hours to do a 3-credit course. And in this one, I did the math in the spreadsheet, and even being generous with, people rewatching some of the videos and things, yeah, it barely comes out to like 35, but definitely under 40 hours. So, roughly a third of what you would expect from, any student in a 3-credit course. Um, and there's so much missing, right? We haven't covered. There's just so much that we haven't covered in terms of content. And part of it's because it's a 7-week course, and it's hard. It's hard to cover much. But what we have hit pretty hard is the motivation issue, and desire and motivations, and what drives one to study religion and think about what is religion and how do we define it before we start. What is theology? Those sort of questions. So anyway, I I'm gonna stop and I'll open it up. Maybe since I invited Nick here in particular, we'll let and I know that I know that Nick is never short on words. So right. So Nick, I want you. What are your thoughts from I don't know any of this?
Well, thank you for having me. That being said, I loved the aspect of war when it came to the reading. Now, when it so just I'm enthralled by this. I need to get off my chest. So like the aspect of taking up arms, but at the same time, it's almost like a perception. So like you can view the sword as either the stabby stab or a deflector. So it's like it's amazing how far back war has literally affected us, and how far back we have literally broken down whether or not we need to or not, and we're still doing it in 2021, and we're just no better at it. It's crazy. But that all being said, I can't believe you invited me to this course. So other than that,
I also just the other thing that I even thought about this afternoon, and I mean, we talk so much about chariots. You took my whole philosophy of human person course, which is all the entire course is around a chariot. In the same way, this religious quest is all around a circle. That of course is all organized around chariots. And I mean, it's not lost on me that you literally are in a chariot.
yeah. So just a little background on me.
I hope that's okay. I hear Cheyenne thinks that very fine. I'm sorry. I hope that's okay, right? But
I am a 9.5-year vet. My 9.5-year mark, I had broken my neck in a pool accident, and I became a drowning victim. And so I was dead for 3.5 minutes. They revived me next to the pool. I came back there. They were mad at the person for bringing me back because they thought I was going to be brain dead. But all of that being said, I came back just as bright and squirrely as you probably see me on this camera. But it kind of changed everything about me, other than, I mean, the physical aspect is literally like, that's what people quell over. It's like, how do they get around? How do they live their life? That's actually the easy part. That's just plain old survival. But it changed my viewpoint a lot. Actually, it took me a very long time to join college. It took me a very long time before I broke my neck, but then it took me an incredibly long time to think that I could actually do a college class, let alone drive on campus to see that beautiful man right there. So it's just, it's more, I literally learned to get over my own fears by force. But so all of that being said, the chariot aspect is so true when it comes to, well, I'm in a wheelchair. You may not be able to see it, but every single day there's a whole lot that I have to dump into when it comes to decisions. Now I am on a solid diet, not literally by want, but more or less by the choice and the outcome. So like, I'm a big science nerd. I am not, now this isn't not a jab at anybody, but I don't follow any religion. It's not that I don't believe in it. It's just that, I mean, I believe everybody has a beautiful perception in their own gorgeous mind, and that's just a human trait. So like, that's what I believe in. But all of that being said, I have to work out every day in order for my body to not have pain ripping through me. So in the chariot, I have major decisions that I have to make, whether or not I get that full body stretch, which I know is going to hurt, or I put it off for a few hours or even a day or two, knowing that it's not going to really cost me that much other than pain, but it's still a decision. It's right up there with, do I eat that last cookie or do I give it to my kid? And I always thought the chariot was such an interesting breakdown, because why not use an automobile back in the day, or not an automobile, but like transportation back in the day? So like, what is communication? My mind is literally transportation of thought. So they use the chariot, which is a beautiful example of what we can all relate to. So like, when Bannon was talking about the chariot back in the day, I couldn't help but think about the 5 senses at the end, though. So like, the breakdown of all of that just makes so much sense, and the struggle of like every single person out there. So, but my story is not all that insane. I'm just here.
No, your story is insane. Your story is awesome, though. Yeah, thank you so much for that and for everything. Also, I just have to add that, I've had plenty of conversations. People talk about the power of positive thinking, the power of positivity, and that kind of stuff. Every time anybody ever mentions the power of positive thinking to me, I always think of you. You are the first person that comes to mind, for real. Not even joking. I'm not even joking. By the way, I'm digging the ponytail. But yeah, I mean, I can't even picture you. Cheyenne probably can. I can't picture you without a smile on your face. I don't even know what that would look like. But anyway, yeah, and the things that you've overcome, and I know that positive aspect is part of it. So anyway, thank you. We'll get more voices than just mine and Nick in here, and
Thank you.
Who wants to go next?
I'm glad you watched The Fisher King. I watched it this week too, as well.
Good. Yeah,
That's
good
an
stuff.
excellent movie.
Yeah,
Rob
I
Williams,
forgot.
he's so beautiful when it comes to how he portrays things.
Yeah, it hurt a little bit, to watch him. I mean, it's such a loss. And actually, it's funny because I've watched Now I've had a kind of religious quest kind of week of watching various different films. I actually just watched Equilibrium. I don't know if you've ever watched that one. It's kind of on the whole Matrix kind of thing a little bit. It came out before the Matrix. If you haven't watched it, Brad, you might want to consider it.
I feel like I have, but I can't. It doesn't. I don't remember, so I'll have to check it out. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. And in one of the podcasts, yeah, some students were talking about Interstellar. And was that Lindsay? Was that your group? Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. Lots of cool connections and ideas there. My CJ, my kid, I first of all have to thank, I always thank them, and I can't thank them enough for doing all of this and for sitting through these college lectures, every Thursday, and for helping out with the tech stuff. But nothing comes for free, and so I gotta to show my, not just say thanks, but show my appreciation. And so I know what they want me to do, which is to dance. So they asked me if I would dance, and so I'm gonna dance, and he's telling me what to do. Do the floss. Okay. So even zoomed out. Okay.
The
So yeah,
footloose.
you know what the
We
backpack,
need
yeah,
footloose.
the floss is, yeah. So I mean, I'm not
This is
great
gonna
at
make
it,
my entire week.
but yeah, but I know it goes something like.
That was gorgeous.
Nailed it. It's my thing. My dad used to teach dance. He never taught me, but
Best part of my day.
okay, thank you. Yeah. All right. There, my part. And now, who wants to talk about the Gita? I got more lecture notes and I got things to read, but I would rather hear from you guys if you want to chime in on any of this, this chariot or anything else. Irene, let's hear from Irene.
Okay, so I remember struggling with this when I first took your class. I think I'm still struggling with it. Um, I just don't I know because Arjuna's like, no, this is wrong. Like, I'm gonna kill people I know and that I love, and that like it's for like a higher purpose, but it's still a loss of life. So, how do you justify that with
Well,
the like alongside like, yeah, but they're your neighbor, and like you have to for the sake of justice, but then like that's not love,
right.
if that makes
Well,
sense.
I mean, I think my perspective is similar to Gandhi's on that question, and partly, I mean, Gandhi wrote a lot about that specific question and addressed it frequently. I think I may have even, I know I've assigned in courses past, his the way he addresses that question, and he addresses it with some frustration that the Gita is written in this way, and he's like, Vyasa, the poet is brilliant, and the Gita is brilliant, but why did they have to put it in the context of a battle? Because Gandhi really genuinely saw it purely on psychological, this internal struggle between, good and bad, the angel on the one side and the demon on the other, right? This sort of internal struggle, or what, St. Paul calls, the spirit of the law within, or in Jeremiah's covenant, and the Hebrew scriptures, the law written on our hearts, right? We know the difference between right and wrong. There's not, that internal struggle is there. It doesn't mean that we always choose what is right, but if we know the difference between right and wrong, we are still nevertheless drawn. We have that desire. We have that desire for those selfish ends, and so that, as long as that struggle is there, if you read Gandhi's autobiography, which is called My Experiments with Truth. And it's a beautiful text. But we always think of Gandhi as being this, just saintly figure who who's just a model, exemplary person in so many ways. And then you read his autobiography, and his autobiography, oh, it's just like self-flagellation from the beginning to the end. It's a series of, I did this wrong. Here's this major thing that I did wrong. Here's this moral failing of mine. Here's this, it's just one after the other. And he kind of beats himself up for all of these things all of these sins that he's committed. But one thing that makes Gandhi completely different than just anybody else is that he didn't do them twice. He would make a mistake, and then he would atone for it and repent for it, and then not ever do it again. And he would change his behavior significantly and permanently as a result. Like just one example, but an important example. When he was fighting the British in South Africa for the Indians who were there, and he fought and nonviolent fighting, always nonviolent fighting, right? But standing up against the British Raj and organizing people to stand up for against the injustices committed by the British, and he was successful, right? Successful not just for himself, but successful in getting the policies and the laws changed and radically changing how Indians in South Africa were treated. And the British, basically said, okay, we're going to give you everything that you want. And this is my example. Or if you read his autobiography, it doesn't say "Yay me." It says that he felt so incredibly terrible because he realized that he had a victory, but only for the Indians, right? And there were all the South Africans, especially the black South Africans there, that were still victims of all of the same injustices and worse that the Indians had been victimized. But now Gandhi had gotten everything that he asked for, and he regretted that he hadn't asked for things for all of the people there. And he said, I will never make this mistake again. And so when he was, that's why he never compromised in India. He didn't just stand up for the Hindus in India. He stood up the Muslims and the Christians and everyone in India, right? And saying everybody, regardless, deserves equality and justice under the law. But that's that internal struggle with whether or not to stand up to those impulses, right? That's how Gandhi looked at it. It was never about physical violence, and he never took physical violence. And yet the Gita is the three main texts. I think it was Lorelei who keeps bringing up Tolstoy.
Yeah.
But the three major influences for Gandhi were the Bhagavad-Gita and Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament, and Tolstoy. These three sort of made his little Prasthana Traya, and these are his major foundational texts, and the Gita being first. But I don't know, is that I know it's not the most satisfying answer, and it wasn't that satisfying for him either. But yeah, what do you think?
So I think and this is what I struggled with sort of 2 years ago, was so inaction. So it's not a question of inaction, like violence versus non-violence. It's inaction is just ignoring the injustice. That's inaction. But even choosing a pacifist response is still an action.
Yep.
Okay.
So it makes me think of, and I don't know if it answered your question at all. To me, when you started to talk about it, it reminded me during George Floyd of the desire for justice switches to sort of a mob mentality in the moment. And I remember this one specific story where it was heightening violence, very confrontational between the people protesting and the police. And one of the police officers ordered all of his guys, take off your riot gear. We're your neighbors. Look at me. I know you. My kids go to your school. And when he talked about the chariot going through the crowd and he saw people on the other side, it's sort of that pause of like, wanting to understand how someone could be on the other side, wanting to understand where they were coming from. You know, tell me more about how you could be on that other side. So being devastated, but also I can't hurt someone when I look them in the eye, you know, and by dropping their armor in that moment, you know, it was, I'm Steve, you know, we have kids in the same school. I'm not this armored soldier that, you know, is the enemy. And he literally told the guys, drop everything, as dangerous as that was, let them see who you are. We are people. We are in your community. We are not your enemy. And he actually said, which I thought was, you know, really just love acts like justice. He said, how about instead of we fight each other, let's have a, you know, a protest together, and I want to march with you because I'm as upset about what happened. And, you know, I'm not here to fight you on it. I'm here to keep the peace, but I'm as devastated as what's happening. And he turned that moment of, you know, just two opposing sides, extreme violence, into see me, I'm your neighbor. So it kind of felt like that.
Good stuff. Yeah, Eric. Chime in.
I think for me, the most influential component of this is that, and I think Lorelai kind of touched upon it, that moment of despair, disappointment, depression from Arjuna, where that physically like sitting back and kind of like shrugging your shoulders and being like, what the hell is going on? Because I think we've all kind of been there, especially during the pandemic. And I think specifically looking back on Insurrection Day and the Capitol storming. And I remember watching that and just being like, that physical action, just sitting down being like, shit, this is what this country has come to. Like, this is where we're at. And with that, I kind of think of that in terms of, it's a lot easier to be idealistic and have these ideologies when I view that other person as the bad guy, when I assume that that person is not me, not like me, doesn't love me, doesn't care about me. The moment, and I think the reason why the Capitol storming was so tragic and hurtful for so many of us is that we saw these people live. We were seeing their faces, we were seeing their giggles, we were seeing them having a grand old time while committing an atrocious act. And that, I think, for me, it hurts a lot more, because it's like, now I can see you, I can see that you're like me, I can see that you're a person, but I just can't fathom your motivation. I can't connect. I can't understand where your frustration is. I can't understand why you're doing this. And it seems like what you're doing is to hurt me in the end, right? And I think that's where I kind of get stuck oftentimes when talking about pursuits of justice, or social justice in general. It's like, okay, we can get past the point where we can take off our riot gear, we can see each other, and we still can't cross that bridge. I can't figure it out. And I'm not sure whether it's a lack of my own understanding or your refusal to understand me, but I just can't get there. And I feel like a lot of times nowadays, or even looking in more recent times, if there's people literally pushing other Asian people on the streets, minding their business, and they're just getting tackled, or they're getting dead cats put on the restaurant because if you're Asian, you're not responsible for COVID, right? And I think for me, it's like, it's hard for me to not either get depressed or just get severely pissed off when I see that, because it's like, I know you're human, I get you're human. Everything in my system wants me to say you're not a human, because how can the human commit those acts? And I know that's an error on my end, but I think it's a pervasive feeling that because of that lack of dialogue, and it goes on both sides, you know, because of that lack of dialogue, that lack of seeing, it's hard not to just kind of sit back and be like, man, shit, here we go again. Like, it's just another thing happening. So that's kind of like the Gita. Even when I read it before, I think it means a lot more to me now in 2021, because that's kind of where I'm at now, where it's like, all right, I see it, I'm getting there, I know I'm progressing towards that circle, but man, is it hard sometimes when I see these things going on.
Dude, you literally put my whole year into words right then. I'm not even kidding. So I've been working in the ICU as a nurse. I've rotated up to the COVID ICU, and just this whole fucking year, man, it kills me a little bit, you know, every time, you know, I see what's going on in the ICU. I see how bad these people are, you know, I watch them die, and then I see everyone inside at a bar, no mask, running around, like everything. And I hear people like, you know, yelling like, oh, well, it's like contradiction to my rights. Like this mask is going to give me like lung cancer, like all this stuff. And it's really, really hard to sit there and, you know, recognize that, like, you know, this is another person and this is, you know, their perspective. And like, how can I meet this without, you know, like a feeling of absolute rage sometimes? And, you know, like that is, you know, we just kind of got to work together and like kind of see. And sometimes it's really hard to like see where the other person is coming from and try and reach that understanding of like, where can we meet this so that you are like respecting other people's like right to live, pretty much.
Sophia? Am I saying that right? I'm terrible with names.
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you for being that awesome of a nurse. So I had my mom grabbed COVID somewhere, but she's fine. But the thing is like,
Thank God.
nurses are awesome, and I couldn't agree with you.
I'm gonna have to cut you off, Nick, because we're at 7:15. But I know you have one of I don't want to cut you off. Love you. But just yeah, I want to add that, you know, we've got 15 students in this course. 15 students taking this course for credit, and I think 10 of them are nurses. So a lot of nurses, yeah, right. And Melissa and Lorelai and Michelle, all of you, and so much. Yeah, thank you so much. And I just on that point, last time I taught this, when I taught this course last spring, I had podcast group of 4 nurses. They were so awesome. They were one of my favorite podcast groups ever. No, I mean one of them. I have so many, but yeah, their podcast started before COVID, and then so listening to them go through it, and yeah, I mean they're mostly 21, 22-year-old women, and that just what Sophie was saying. I mean, just the effect of having of just seeing people die day after day after day, um, you know, uh, and then of course going to the store where somebody won't wear a mask because of their rights. It's like, well, you have whatever rights you want, but please think of people besides yourself.
Yeah,
and
it's been a struggle with trying to teach and trying to get people to understand like empathy this year, which I'll be honest, I burnt out of trying to do that a while ago. I'm just trying to like keep doing what I'm doing. It's been a study in dharma and suadharma like this whole year for me, and like I love my job. I would not do another thing ever. But I think I've understood it a little bit better at this point.
Sometimes it's hard to just keep swimming, just keep swimming.
That's been the motto, my dude.
Right?
I'm Dory.
Well, we're over, and I want to stop at 7:15. So well, I mean, it's a little after, but thank you all so much. This has been, an experiment. I started out to saying we were going to do 6-week experiment, which turned into 7-week experiment because I'm not good at reading the calendar, and yeah, I want to keep going. So I'm going to keep going, and yeah, as long as there's one person in the meet, then I'm going to keep rolling. So and anyway, thank you all very much, and